Good morning again, and welcome to this, the second panel discussion of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week, the UK's biggest green infrastructure conference for the energy economy. Many thanks to our sponsors for the week, Cundall, Epicam and Vattenfall Heat UK, for their support for the week. This particular session is going to be focusing on energy storage, and as ever, we have a really excellent and knowledgeable panel that I'm sure will give us some real insights into the future of energy storage and its pivotal role in the transition to a sustainable energy landscape. Our speakers in this session include Professor Martin Freer, Chief Executive of the Faraday Institution, who I know is going to explore a number of essential approaches to managing the intermittency of future energy generation. Tony Dye, Chief Technology Officer at Epicam, who are one of the sponsors of our week. So thanks again to them. We'll discuss his development of scalable, longer duration liquid air energy storage and regeneration and the potential for that. Professor Seamus Garvey, who's Professor of Dynamics from the University of Nottingham, is going to highlight the diverse landscape of energy storage solutions that are going to be needed for a net zero UK. And Naomi Baker, who's Senior Policy Manager at Energy UK, will explore the level playing field in energy markets, addressing how market mechanisms can lower prices and whether the 2030 target, and that's just a little over 5 years away now, will aid or hinder process. So a lot to get through there and a lot to discuss. And if you've got any questions, please post them in the questions box, which is a little speech bubble on your screen with a question mark in it. And hopefully we'll be able to get to those questions during the course of the question session with our speakers. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to bring in our first speaker, who is Professor Martin Freer, Chief Executive of the Faraday Institution. Martin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Andy. And just to maybe explain what on earth the Faraday Institution is for those of you who don't know, but it's a UK innovation program associated with development of battery and battery technologies, of course. One of the premier energy storage or electricity storage technologies that we have to deploy as we're looking to decarbonize the grid. These batteries, so we've got current generation, we've got next generation, have a very significant role to play in managing the energy transition. And that energy transition, as you all know, involves much more intermittent generation on our grid from both wind and solar. And as we move towards a zero carbon electricity grid 2030 onwards, we need to think about how we manage that intermittency. And I think what we've seen from the work of the NESO is that we're going to need about 25 gigawatts of battery storage sitting on the grid. And what's good is that already we have a pipeline of companies who are prepared to install that capacity. Longer duration energy storage is also required, and I'm sure Seamus is going to talk more about that, but it's interesting how batteries might push into that territory, and we can come back to that. But the other thing that we need to think about if we're managing our grid is what sits at the consumer end of things. And batteries have a very significant role to play at the domestic scale. So think about the electric vehicles that we're going to have parked outside our homes, most of us in the future and some of us now. How we can use that storage capacity locally is a really important part of the puzzle that we need to consider. So Andy, I'll stop there because I think discussion is going to be the most important part of this session. I'm very happy to kind of pick up some of those areas.
Martin, thanks very much for that. We will indeed pick up on those areas during the questions session in this panel discussion. I'd just like now to introduce our next panelist, and our next panelist is Tony Dye, who's the Chief Technology Officer at Epicam. Tony, it's over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, everyone. Two challenges face the world that is confronted by climate change and intends to avoid existential catastrophe. The first is how to deliver sufficient energy storage to enable all global power grids to operate entirely dependent upon renewable energy. The second is how to extract 10 gigatons per year of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to repair Earth's climate. My company, Epicam, is developing a singular new, fully scalable technology, LAESAR, liquid air energy storage and regeneration, that is capable of addressing not just one, but both of these huge challenges simultaneously. LAESAR's suitability as an energy storage technology has been established by a team at Imperial College under Professor Martinez Portas. Their comprehensive thermodynamic model shows that LAESAR can store surplus energy available on the grid and deliver it back to the grid with a round-trip efficiency of 68%. LAESAR can also extract carbon dioxide and methane from the process air as byproducts at negligible extra cost. LAESAR's scalability enables it to transform wind turbines to become local energy storage and distribution facilities with enhanced performance and much improved connection to the grid. The electrical generator in the nacelle of a wind turbine can be replaced by an air liquefaction unit matched to the capacity of the turbine driving it. The liquid air and heat of compression can be stored in the support structure, and the generator can be located at the base of the structure where it will be driven by an Epicam expansion engine. Electrical energy can be delivered to the grid as and when demanded by the grid, which eliminates the currently wasteful curtailment which occurs when the grid cannot accept power. This potential development opens the prospect of a new global industry to retrospectively transform the existing and new build wind turbines. It means that the liquefaction unit will add to the energy store and extract greenhouse gases all the time that the turbine is in operation. Grid power expansion is already underway, following development of new data centers and electrification of transport. It is possible that when the decarbonisation of industry, transport and agriculture is complete, the expansion of energy storage capacity on the grid will reach such a level that the extraction of carbon dioxide globally will approach the level of 10 gigatons per year, sufficient to repair the climate in 30 to 40 years. If this can be achieved in this way, then it will not only avoid the cost of conventional direct air capture extraction of carbon dioxide, currently estimated at between 600 and 1,000 pounds per tonne, but it will have been achieved accompanied by only net benefit arising from the profitable energy storage activity. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Tony. Again, in the question session, we'll drill down into those issues. I'm sure. Our next speaker is Professor Seamus Garvey, who's the Professor of Dynamics from the University of Nottingham. Professor Garvey, it's your floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy. I have two simple messages that I'd like to transmit. I've just realized I'm in quite an echoey room. Sorry about that. It's at the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. The first message is one about scale, and the second one is about diversity of solutions. And in very simple terms, let's start with the scale. The UK as a country is going to spend several £100 billion on transitioning to net zero. And that's a good thing. That's a good spend of money. But what we don't realize is that a very significant chunk of that, several £100 billion, will be on energy storage. So energy storage is not a sideshow. It is not a small consideration. It is a very major consideration in our overall transition. And the second thing is about diversity. We will have batteries, of course. I think more than 25 gigawatts, frankly, but we can debate the numbers. We will also have hydrogen and other fuels that are very suited for storing energy over long durations. Batteries particularly suited for the shorter durations, up to 4 hours, perhaps beyond 4 hours, perhaps 6, 8, 10 hours, but there is a limit at some point there. And in the middle of that, there's a set of technologies, and I think the boundary is about 4 hours at the moment, between discharge times of 4 hours and 200 hours, where a different set of technologies is best. And I refer to these generically as medium duration energy storage technologies, and they are going to do the heavy lifting. If you calculate it in terms of how much energy will come out of storage from each of the three main categories, the category in the middle will be doing the heavy lifting. It will put out about 90% of all the energy that comes out of storage. And it's a category that is not yet proportionately recognized. So my key message here is it's big. There are three categories, and one of them is underrepresented.
Thanks very much for that, Seamus. I'm going to now move to our next panelist in this session, who is Naomi Baker, Senior Policy Manager at Energy UK. Naomi, it's over to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the panel this morning. So just to explain a bit about Energy UK and what we do. So we're an energy trade body. We represent the whole of the downstream market. We represent 97% of retail in the UK and 80% of generation. I lead our work on storage and demand side response, and as part of that run two industry working groups, one working on storage, so that's everything from long duration storage to batteries, and one working on demand side response. So I don't have the expertise of the other members on the panel, but what I do have is the insights from my members, so I know what they're talking about, what the concerns are, and also the tensions between the different industry players, because we represent such a wide diversity of players. So I've got 3 points I really want to make, because these come up a lot when we're having industry discussions. So one is the tension between markets and strategic planning. So as all the panelists have spoken about before, we will need lots of batteries. We'll also need lots of long duration energy storage. And as Seamus just said, we don't know now where the sort of boundary will be. It's not clear now at what duration batteries will be cost effective at in, say, 2030. So will it be, so now it's around 4 hours, but in 5 years that could change quite a lot. So will they be cost effective at a 6 hour duration, or at an 8 hour duration, or a 10 hour duration? So the tricky thing is that whilst we'll need strategic planning to ensure we get sort of the bigger kit to do the long duration online, we don't know what batteries will be able to do. So we have to so there's a tension between how much strategic planning do we do and how much do we leave to the market. So all members are very supportive of markets to drive the best value for consumers, but at the same time, we need to ensure we have enough of the big kit online. So I think, I can talk about it later, but we would very much like more forward planning of markets so that we can use markets wherever possible. The second point I'd like to make is a stronger focus and more governance around how assets are being used at the moment on the system. So we've got nearly 5 gigawatts of battery on the system at the moment. They could be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in energy balancing, for example. So the last hour energy balancing between supply and demand, most of that is being done by gas at the moment. LCP did some analysis in 2022. They estimated that when we had 4 gigawatts of batteries online, that could be picking up 50% of that market, which is called the balancing mechanism. And when we had 10 gigawatts of battery, that could be doing 70% of that. But in actual fact, whilst we have 5 gigawatts of battery, that market is still primarily gas, because it's the control that we have and the way that the system was set up means that we're struggling to use those assets effectively. So that's increasing costs for consumers and slowing down the transition. So we would like to see more governance around tackling that issue. So the third point that I'd like to make is how we can use these lower cost assets, so that's batteries and also demand side response, to drive down costs for consumers now. So we know that the energy transition is primarily an infrastructure challenge. So we're replacing the old infrastructure with a newer, more efficient, lower cost infrastructure that will reduce running costs. But before that, there's the cost of changing that infrastructure. We would like more of a strategic focus about how we can do that so that we can pull forward some of those costs for consumers. If we're expecting consumers to participate in this transition and to host infrastructure, we think we need to be quite creative about how we can pull forward some of those benefits. Those are my 3 points. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Naomi, for that. We're going to get into the questions right now, actually, and I want to go back to our first speaker, to Martin Freer from the Faraday institution. Obviously, one of the key challenges is scaling up grid scale battery storage. So, from your perspective, what are those challenges and how do we address them?
So I think there's a number of challenges, actually. So clarity over what the future grid infrastructure looks like is really important. Again, going back to the role of the NESO and the regional energy system planning, that process, which is now up and running, helps provide that clarity of where the generation is, what the grid infrastructure is going to look like, or will provide this clarity, and therefore where optimally do you put the storage systems. So I think that is very, very positive. Of course, still there is a very long queue, and sometimes expensive queue, which is associated with connecting either generation or storage technologies to the grid. And again, work needs to be done to reduce the length of that queue and optimize the delivery of both the generation and storage. But I think the other challenge is an energy system is not just about electricity. And we do often focus on the electrical dimension. And we have a few challenges when it comes to decarbonisation. And it's not just the grid, but it's our transportation system and our heating system. And in fact, those two last things, in terms of energy, are very, very significant, much, much more significant than our current electricity generation. So I think the real challenge is how we think about the solution as a whole. And going back to what I was talking about at the domestic level, if we are electrifying transport and we're electrifying heat, much more of the time will we find homes with heat pumps and electric vehicles. And it's really interesting to see and examine how you can couple these. So if you've got an electric vehicle, you've got something like 50 to 100 kilowatt hours of storage capacity sitting outside your home. And that's enough to run your home for at least a day and maybe more than a day. And you can think about, therefore, how do you optimize the coupling of that battery with your heat pump. Maybe you've got thermal storage inside your home. So there's a local optimization that can be done there. And that has real cost benefits. You can drive down, because of the variation of price, you can drive down the cost of running your home. And it does seem to me that we need to connect together what's happening at the large scale. So the planning of the grid infrastructure and the generation and storage which needs to sit there with what is going on at the local level. Otherwise, we'll end up with a mismatch of the solutions.
Thanks very much for that, Martin. One of the things that strikes me, and this is, I want to aim this question at Tony Dye, is that we've basically got a massive task on our hands here in terms of reducing the carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere. It's a massive task, and according to some estimates, including the House of Lords, they say that the UK will ultimately need energy storage capacity of 50 times that of one of the facilities that exists in Wales. So how can we actually achieve what we need to achieve, given the time scales that we're dealing with here, which are rapidly contracting? How can we do all of that in a timely and affordable way?
Yes, I think there's no question there needs to be an increased realization of the nature of the crisis that we're in. It's quite clearly obvious that climate change is not only happening, but it's being caused by the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if you look at the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it has increased by 2 parts per million every year for the last 10 years and doesn't show any signs yet of even slowing down. So the IPCC has made it quite clear that we cannot possibly wait until 2050, if we have by then even achieved so-called net zero, before we start to seriously require to extract carbon dioxide from atmosphere. We have to do it more seriously and sooner. And I think there's no question in my mind that there is any other way of reducing the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere than by processing the atmosphere itself. And processing the atmosphere is an extremely expensive business. So this is why I'm suggesting that the technology which we are looking at, which combines the energy storage capability with an extraction of carbon dioxide, so that when the technology is implemented, there will be nothing but net benefit from the moment that it starts until the end of repair of the climate.
Thanks, Tony, for that. I want to turn to Seamus. Again, I suppose it's a kind of a question around cost, really, and cost is going to come up, and I think it's going to come up increasingly in this area as well. But from your perspective, what would be the cost difference to the UK if we didn't have any medium duration storage, i.e. if we used mainly batteries plus hydrogen?
Thanks very much for the question, Andy. Sorry, I was on mute.
That's all right, no problem.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I was part of the group that prepared the Royal Society study, and the Royal Society study on large-scale electricity storage was published last year in September and came to the conclusion that net zero is affordable and that one possible solution to it can be achieved using predominantly hydrogen and batteries. And by taking representative costs, now these are not certain costs, but realistic expected costs for different varieties of medium duration energy storage, the conclusion is that it probably represents a 5% reduction in cost to the consumer on the overall use of electricity. So a very, very significant amount. As I mentioned earlier on, we are already, by the way, we are already right now spending upwards of £50 billion per year on energy in the UK. So, often the anti-renewables lobby trots out the large expenses and says this is terrible. Somebody's proposing to spend £200 billion. We're spending tens of billions of pounds every year that we never get back. It's not an investment; it's down the drain. So several percent of many tens of billions of pounds per year is what is out there. That's the advantage.
Okay, thanks for that, and thanks for putting that that figure into some sort of context as well. I just want to turn to Naomi now, and you talked about a number of different technology classes, I suppose. How can we support those differing technology classes to compete, to drive the best outcomes for consumers? Because ultimately, we've got to make sure, I think, that consumers are benefiting from from all of this, and kind of flowing from that as well. And I'd like the views of the other panelists on this question. It came up in our last session, and I think it's really, really important. How do we gain public acceptance for the transition? Because unless we can do that, then we're going to be, we're going to have some real challenges to overcome.
So I spoke earlier about the tension between strategic planning and markets and the need for both. What members would really like to see in this area is more forward planning of markets. So the markets that we have today are rightly designed around the system problems of today. So for example, we have a market called the capacity market, which is aimed primarily at avoiding any issues between the peak energy peak that we have today, which is largely over the sort of 4 to 7 p.m. in the evening, when everyone comes home, puts on the kettle, starts cooking, or that sort of thing, puts a light on. We know that the challenges of the future system will be very different. What industry needs in order to be able to invest in the right way is to know what those markets and those revenue streams will look like 5 years from now and 10 years from now. That will help them take their best guess at what sort of assets to invest in, what duration batteries, what longer duration technologies. So they'll be able to make better judgments, and they'll be able to their investors will be able to see where those revenue streams are coming from. It's very difficult investing on the back of markets today when we know that the markets and system needs will be very different tomorrow. So we're calling on NESO to set forward those, to produce a more objective, there's lots of different independent consultants. We want a more sort of industry consensus on what the system needs will be and how the markets will deal with those issues.
Thanks very much. And I think within that there's probably maybe a call, and we heard this in our last session, for a bit more long-term, a longer view, really, even longer than the current political cycle, so that we can get some kind of shared understanding on what needs to be done going forward. And obviously that certainty is obviously vital for for industry to plan. I just want to move to some of the questions that I've got in front of me in our questions box. And there's a question here from Richard Dean, and he asks, does the panel see geological storage as a viable long duration energy storage method, technology using air or hydrogen? So geological storage, is that viable? And if I can start off with Martin Freer on that question.
So can I loop back to that particular question? I will come back to it. I would say just going to something that Naomi was talking about, and indeed Andy, you were prompting us to think about. The kind of long-term bit is really really important, and I'm optimistic at the moment that the current government have an approach which is setting a level of certainty around the future. And I think the next component, which is the industrial strategy, which should come shortly, is a really important signal to the markets and to UK industry. And if we are to get the most out of this transition, which maybe begins to touch into the public acceptance side of things. We're going to need to lower the price if we can, and we're going to need to create jobs on the back of this. And so making sure that we have supply chains which point into the UK and people can see the real benefits of employment and growth and prosperity that this transition creates. I mean, I think that is where we need to be. And, I think you can pick your own sectors, but, even in the battery sector, there is tremendous opportunity. We need more gigafactories than we've got if we're going to deploy the level of electrification that we're looking at. So these are monster opportunities. As for geological storage, I guess there's all sorts of forms of this. One can do compressed air, one can do hydrogen storage. You can also think about how you use the subsurface for thermal storage, interseasonal. And there's lots of good ideas out there. At the moment, the challenge in this space is making any of them stack up from a commercial perspective. And as we go forward, we need to think about, as a country, where do our priorities sit? So compressed air storage, it's more expensive, but we need it. And so do we need to subsidize it in order to bring it onto the grid? And those kinds of decisions need to be thought about as we move forward with this next phase of the infrastructure development.
Thanks, Martin. To turn to you, Tony, this issue of geological storage, do you see it as viable? Is it, how can that work?
I think it possibly has a limited role to play, but I'd like to just return to the possibility of using hydrogen for energy storage. The problem with hydrogen is the splitting of the water molecule to generate the hydrogen in the first place. So you're talking about a system which would have a round trip efficiency of no more than about 30%, 30 to 35 at the very best. Whereas with liquid air energy storage, you're looking at 60 to 70. So you would need half the number of wind turbines in a liquid air system than you would need for hydrogen.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Seamus.
Yeah, so I'm going to really disagree with Tony on this. I'm not going to disagree with the efficiency of hydrogen storage. That number is about right, but different types of stores serve different purposes. So hydrogen will not have a limited role. It will have a colossal role, and there is no doubt about that. And we will have to, in this country, well, in a cost-optimized version of this country, we will have to have large stores of energy in the order of 50 days worth of electricity. So this is a very big number. Andy, you mentioned earlier on 50 times as much as de Norwig, or you said a power plant in Wales, but I'm sure that's what you meant. 50 times as much as de Norwig is half a terawatt hour, and we need 50 terawatt hours. So we're on a very, very different scale. And the only way that you're going to get green energy being stored in that kind of quantity is geological. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And the main contender here is hydrogen stored in caverns, and we have to be getting on with that. But importantly, it's not the only show in town. So it's absolutely essential. We need it for the energy storage capacity, the size of the tank, but we shouldn't be filling that tank and emptying it very often. So if you don't fill and empty the tank very often, it doesn't matter that much that you only got back 30% of what you put into the tank. And I want to connect this also together with the social acceptance thing. That's massively important. The public has to be brought with us, and we're asking a huge trust from the public to believe that this is really a good way in which to go. And in my opinion, trust is based on transparency and openness. We need to be showing the public what is the basis upon which these decisions are made, and what are the other alternatives that we have considered and discounted, and why. Because there are large communities out there seeking to, I'll use the phrase, derail the project, and they've got a lot of ammunition, and the protection against that incoming fire is openness, and we should be open. And finally, to kind of pull that together, both Martin and Naomi mentioned the commercial perspective, and that's a huge difficulty with energy storage. How do you pay for a cavern, say a hydrogen cavern, that's only going to be filled once every 2 years? How do you make a business model that pays for that? And I don't know the answer to that, but what I do see very clearly is that where we should start is we should figure out what set of assets serve the UK best. So never mind the details about who pays for them and when, but how much in total do we have to pay, and what is that best set of assets? And as soon as we have discovered what is that best set of assets, then after we've done that, we look at market mechanisms in order to bring that set of assets into reality. Thank you.
Thanks, Seamus. Tony, do you want to come back on any of that before I move on to another question?
Well, I do think that Seamus has put his finger on the cost aspect, which is already enormous. But if you then follow that with thinking about how do you extract 10 gigatons per year of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then the cost there is absolutely astronomical if you're going to do it by processing the air and filtering out the carbon dioxide, as is done by Climeworks at the moment in Iceland.
Okay, thanks for that, Tony. Naomi, you've got your hand up. Your comments on that?
No, it's not actually on that, but I did realise I'd forgotten to answer that part of the question in terms of how do you pull for the benefits. So what both Seamus and Tony were talking about, it's incredibly hard. How do you finance that? So that's completely agree with Seamus. We will need that. We need to figure out how best to finance it. But I think there's things that we could be doing now with markets now to pull forward some of those benefits for consumers, more easy wins, if you like. So Martin mentioned earlier about the potential for to use EVs to support the system and also to reward consumers. So one of our members, for example, has over 1 gigawatt of smart charging at the moment. That smart charging could be used now in the system to support with energy balancing, to support with frequencies response, to provide more competition, to help reduce the reliance on gas that we have, and to increase competition and drive down prices. That gigawatt of demand largely has nowhere to go. Most balancing and ancillary markets are not accessible to it. So it could technically do the job, but it's not being used. So there's a way to, so more focus on how markets are working now would mean more of that money going back to consumers. That would create revenue streams that would offset their high capital costs of, for example, electric vehicles, would allow more consumers to get electric vehicles and start sort of that transition faster. So we would like to see a more strategic look, which is, I think, exactly what Martin was saying. So another sort of easy win that we could be doing. 2 years ago in the energy crisis, the ESO, as it was then, set up the Demand Flexibility Service, which provided a vehicle for consumers to turn down power in their homes just to reschedule their washing machine or whatever. And then those millions and millions of tiny little loads, so 2.6 million households doing their washing later, adds up to a sizable volume, which can have a real impact on the system. So that vehicle could be used to be doing turn up now to help with some of the problems we're having with network constraints and energy balancing. So we could be doing this stuff now, but we're not. So I think whilst we've got these really tricky problems that Tony and Seamus were talking about geological storage and how we finance that, there's lots of smaller things that we could be doing now.
Thanks, Naomi. What's coming through to me here is, and it's come through in a number of our panel discussions, and that's around things being properly joined up, making all the different connections. How do we get this power storage into the grid? It seems to me that there's some brilliant ideas, brilliant technologies, but we're not taking that wider view to actually make this happen. Now, we can all say, well, we need a wider view, we need a wider view, we need a long-term view. But how do we impress that on the politicians at the end of the day? Because they're going to be the ones who are actually going to have to implement this. And then flowing from that, how do we take the public with us on that particular journey? Because again, without that, you're not going to get there. And then you'll have politicians leaning back on and leaning into negative attitudes from the public who don't want it, you know. And we know there's a lot of things going on in the world at the moment, particularly overnight, which might change the perception around some of these issues. You know, we've got massive challenge here. How are we going to get there? And I'm going to throw that impossible question to begin with to Seamus Garvey, and then I'm going to go around the table. So Seamus, massive challenge. How do we get that longer view embedded into politicians' psyche going forward so that we can actually make some real progress in this area?
Thanks very much, Andy. I don't know the answer to that. I understand the problem very well, and the real problem is that democracy, which used to be a fantastic thing, deems that we change our government every term, every 4 or 5 years.
Freudian slip.
Yeah, indeed, every couple of years, and we have to have policies that last beyond the term of a parliament. So I don't know how one achieves that, but we cannot have decisions being made that will then determine the outcomes of elections, because that just leads to far too much short-termism. That's ultimately a major problem. Don't know the answer.
Okay, thanks, Seamus. Tony, as someone from business, and I know business traditionally doesn't want to get too involved in politics, but I think we can all agree that that longer term view would be beneficial to all stakeholders. So from your perspective, how do we get that across? How do we, get people to see that?
Well, I think we should realize that we already have a huge population globally of wind turbines. If we could do a demonstration and show the effect on the transformation of a wind turbine, so that it is not only being an energy storage facility, but also an extraction of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then I think we have a chance. It's going to take a few years, but the demonstration is what we need, and we need a prototype to demonstrate. So we're looking for £6.5 million in order to build a prototype, and it's not easy to do that.
Martin, this concept of, and I really wanted to try and get into this because I think it is crucial. It's come up in a number of sessions now. How do we get politicians to realise that they've got to go, beyond the normal political cycle? It's almost like we're asking them to do something that's alien to them because all they're interested in is getting re-elected. I'd like to think there'd be someone out there who'd be prepared to, I suppose, tell the public the truth and say, look, this is what we need as a society. Or am I just being idealistic and it's pie in the sky?
Well, I do think we need some of that. So I do think we need a national dialogue around the net zero transition. I'm slightly more optimistic than maybe you're picking up from previous discussions, in the sense that I do think that we have the mechanisms in place to do that joining up. So we've got the mechanism of local area energy planning, and the regional planning, the national planning. These frameworks have now been put in place, and in some instances are well underway. So I think part of the answer to this question is putting in those frameworks, putting in bodies which have a long-term commitment to deliver. And so the Labour government set up Mission Control, which has got this, with Chris Stark, which has got this mission to deliver the clean electricity by 2030. And the challenge is then, so having a plan is one thing, but then to put in place the incentives, if you're thinking about, well, go back to the local bit and where the people sit in their homes, and we've been pretty miserable on delivering out heat pumps. We've rode back on our commitments to electric vehicles, and And we need to think seriously about how to join some of these things up to get the right sorts of incentives. So you need the national conversation, but also to encourage people to go do the right thing. And with politicians, I guess with people like Ed Miliband, we do have people with that drive and determination. I think there is a problem that whether there is a wider sharing of that ambition across the rest of the House. There's so many challenges this country faces. Where this one sits, for different people, it sits in different places, and it's not top of the list for everybody. But I think the structures are in place, which gives some confidence that we've got a way forward through this.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Naomi, just on this issue and really getting to grips with taking that longer view. I know that many of your members would find it easier if we had that longer approach, but just trying to delve into it. How do you go about as a business association getting that point across to our politicians? Because I think from where I'm sat, it's an absolute must. It's also a no-brainer, although I understand the political nuances of all this. But unless someone takes the bull by the horns, I think we're going to be coming around the same boy over and over again. So, how do you view this situation?
I think probably to echo some of the points that Martin just made, I think three things. Institutional governance is key. Part of the reason for the UK's success so far in the transition is that we've got a very strong system of institutional governance. So the carbon budgets, which were set up at the beginning of the decade, so there's a system of 5-year carbon budget. So those exist beyond parliamentary terms, so you don't get the political interference when the government changes. I think that's been really important for creating stability. Having the Climate Change Committee as an independent centre of expertise which can advise government, that has been important. So continuing, and I completely agree with what Martin was saying, the steps that the government has made so far in putting in new mechanisms of institutional governance will be key for the 2030 target. So that's a core thing. The second thing, completely agree on, there's more storytelling that we need from government to join up the different areas. It's not clear to consumers how wind turbines join up to heat pumps and what they get out of it. We need to tell a better story about what people are going to get. Otherwise, I think it will be difficult. We know that any change in the home is difficult. The government can't afford to expend political capital on consumers not wanting to do it. So it needs to tell a really clear story of the benefits. So along with that, the third point is this point about bringing forward the benefits. So although there's lots of different things that could be done and it's difficult and there's lots of priorities, and one thing that it could do is move the levies that currently sit on the electricity bill. So to maybe rebalance and put some of them on gas, maybe move them so that we pay them off more gradually, so that there's a big hit and consumers can see that, they can see that electricity costs are much cheaper, and they can see that moving to an electric vehicle or an electric heat pump would have a much lower running costs. So I think it's those three things. So in terms of our membership, much of the capital would come from industry, but we do need consumers to be on board. So I think that's the key thing. How do we keep consumers on board?
Thanks very much, Naomi. And I think that's a good point to end this panel discussion on. I think the centrality of that aim of keeping consumers not only on board, but I think also engaged. There's some excellent examples out there of organisations that are engaging with their customer base around these issues and keeping them informed. And I think that is a message that we need to take forward. Obviously, the government should be keenly aware of that, because those consumers are ultimately their voters. But again, once again, during Green Infrastructure Week, we've got a really strong message around communications coming through, around the need to raise the profile as well of the benefits, the real benefits of going down this particular route. I'd just like to thank all of our panelists in this session, to Professor Seamus Garvey, to Martin Freer, to Naomi Baker, and to Tony Dye as well from one of our sponsors. Really thank you for your insights and for being so open and honest in the comments that you actually made. Our next session is going to start at 20 past 11, and it's a session, sorry, at 11:30. I'm getting ahead of myself there. I'm just looking at the time on my own watch. It's 11:30, our next session, which is going to be looking at the grid and building resilient systems for a cleaner future. So do stay online. It's the same link. Join us online in 10 minutes time for that session on the grid. Thanks again to all of our panelists, and really appreciate your contributions this morning. Thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.